I never imagined I'd end up in a showdown with my HOA president. But life has a funny way of catching you off guard. My name's Alex. About 6 months ago, I moved into Sycamore Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns, peaceful sidewalks, and, as I'd soon learn, a homeowners association president with power complex straight out of a dystopian novel. Her name was Karen Wilkins. According to my neighbors, Karen had been running the HOA for 5 years, and not because people love her leadership. No one else wanted the job. She'd turned what should have been a community service role into her own little empire. Karen patrolled the neighborhood in her spotless white SUV, tape measure and clipboard in hand. She was known for citing residents for things like grass growing half an inch too tall, or leaving a trash can out just a few hours too long. It was like living next door to a mall cop with a legal pad. For the first 3 months, I stayed off her radar. I followed the rules, kept my yard clean, my trash hidden, and my head down. Then I had my accident. A rock-climbing fall left me with a shattered femur and confined to a wheelchair for the next 6 months. After 2 weeks in the hospital, I came home to a new problem. My house had 3 front steps. Getting inside wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It was impossible. So my brother and I got to work. We built a simple wooden ramp, safe, solid, and temporary. The plan was to remove it once I could walk again. It took a weekend to finish. And for the first time since the accident, I was able to leave and enter my home on my own. That independence lasted exactly 2 days. I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. In bold letters, it read, "Unapproved structural modification. Remove within 48 hours or face daily fines of $100. Signed in neat cursive, Karen Wilkins, HOA President. I immediately called the number listed on the notice. Karen picked up on the second ring, her voice cool and professional. "Sycamore Estates HOA, this is Karen speaking." "Hi, Karen. This is Alex Mitchell, 427 Burwood Lane. I just received a violation notice about my wheelchair ramp, and I was hoping we could talk about it." There was a long sigh on the other end. "Mr. Mitchell, all structural modifications require prior board approval, with documentation submitted at least 30 days in advance. It's clearly outlined in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the covenant you signed when purchasing your home." I took a slow breath. "I get that, but this wasn't a typical renovation. It was an emergency. I'm temporarily in a wheelchair. I need that ramp to enter and exit my home." "There are no exceptions for emergencies, Mr. Mitchell," she cut in sharply. "If we allow one person to break the rules, they stop being rules." I felt frustration creeping into my voice. "But this is a reasonable accommodation. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides protections. The ADA applies to public spaces and businesses." She snapped like she was correcting a child. "Our HOA is a private entity. The rules of Sycamore Estates take priority." I was stunned. "The ramp must be removed or the fines will begin as scheduled," she concluded. "And if you plan to live here long term, I suggest you spend more time reading the bylaws and less time quoting irrelevant federal regulations." Before I could respond, she added one last parting line. "Have a nice day." Then the call ended. The line had gone dead. I sat there in my wheelchair, staring at my phone in disbelief. I'm not someone who seeks out conflict. I usually prefer to handle things calmly and quietly. But something about Karen's dismissive, condescending attitude lit a fire in me. What she didn't know, I had spent over 15 years as a corporate compliance attorney before transitioning into teaching law at the local university. If she wanted to battle over legal jargon, she had picked the wrong homeowner. That night, I pulled out both the HOA Covenant and the Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines and combed through them thoroughly. To my surprise, Karen was technically right about one thing. HOAs do a broad authority to regulate the appearance of properties. But where she was dead wrong was assuming that authority allowed them to override federal law. The ADA clearly prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, and that includes temporary disabilities. Reasonable accommodations, such as wheelchair ramps, cannot be denied. In fact, the Department of Housing and Urban Development had already ruled in similar cases that ramps like mine were fully protected. By morning, I had drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. I laid out the specific ADA regulations Karen was violating, cited legal precedents, and outlined the potential consequences for noncompliance. I also made it clear that I was prepared to escalate the matter legally if the issue wasn't resolved immediately. I sent copies to every board member, not just Karen. 3 days later, I received an email directly from her. Your request for exemption has been noted but must follow proper channels. The ramp remains unauthorized. Fines will begin tomorrow as scheduled. That same afternoon, I spotted her white SUV parked across the street. She wasn't even trying to hide it, standing there with her phone out, snapping pictures of my ramp. When she noticed me watching from the window, she smiled and gave a smug little wave before driving off. The next morning, my security camera recorded her placing something on my front door. Another bright orange violation notice. This one said fines had now officially commenced, starting at $100, with another $100 to be added every day the ramp remained. I gave it one more day, hoping someone on the board might respond. Nothing. So I moved to Phase 2. I contacted 3 different parties: the Department of Justice's ADA Compliance Division, the State Housing Authority, and a former legal colleague of mine who specializes in disability discrimination. She agreed to represent me pro bono and sent Karen a formal cease and desist letter outlining every violation and the significant legal risks involved. Meanwhile, the State Housing Authority launched an investigation, and the DOJ added my complaint to their growing file of HOA-related accessibility violations. I thought that might finally be enough to stop her. It wasn't. Instead, Karen doubled down. That Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of power tools. I rolled to the window and was stunned by what I saw. Karen was standing at the end of my driveway, clipboard in hand, while 2 men were actively dismantling my ramp. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There are people on my property tearing down my wheelchair ramp without permission, I said. I'm disabled. This is my only way in and out of my home. They're trespassing and destroying my property. By the time officers arrived, half the ramp was already gone. Karen stood tall, binder of HOA documents hugged tightly to her chest like armor. This homeowner is in violation of our covenant, she told the responding officer confidently. As HOA president, I'm authorized to remedy violations after proper notice. The officer, a serious-looking woman in her 40s, turned to me. Is that accurate, sir? I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. No, I'm temporarily disabled. That ramp is a legal accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. She has no right to remove it. The Americans with Disabilities Act gives me the right to access my own home, I told the officer firmly. I filed all the appropriate legal documentation and formally challenged the HOA's position. What they've done here isn't just wrong, it's illegal. I handed her a folder with everything: letters from my attorney, documentation from the Department of Justice, and my initial request for accommodation. As the officer flipped through the pages, Karen's face went pale. She crossed her arms tighter and tried to maintain her composure, but the rising color in her cheeks betrayed her. Finally, the officer looked up. "Ma'am," she said calmly, turning to Karen, "you need to have your workers stopped immediately. What you're doing may violate several laws, including destruction of private property and civil rights protections under the ADA." Karen's jaw clenched. "Officer, with all due respect, you don't understand HOA law. Our covenant clearly." The officer cut her off, her tone sharpening. "HOA covenants do not override federal law. I strongly advise you to cease this activity now, or I'll be forced to escalate this further." Karen shot me a glare that could have set grass on fire. "Fine," she snapped. Then, turning to the workers, "Stop. For now, we'll resolve this through proper channels." The 2 men exchanged glances, clearly relieved, and set down their tools. Karen stormed off to her white SUV without another word. The officer turned back to me. "Sir, I suggest you document the damage and contact your attorney right away. Would you like to press charges for destruction of property?" I watched Karen's SUV disappear down the street. "Yes," I said, "I believe I would." What followed was a month-long legal back and forth. Karen convinced the HOA board to approve funds for legal defense. Their first attorney, after reviewing the situation, strongly advised him to settle. So Karen fired him. She brought in another lawyer, one who promised to fight for the HOA's right to preserve neighborhood standards. That attorney lasted less than 2 weeks before also recommending they settle. He quietly resigned. Then the media caught wind of the story. A Channel 12 reporter reached out, asking for an interview. I declined, wanting to avoid turning it into a spectacle. But they aired the story anyway. The headline? Local HOA president under federal investigation for disability discrimination. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was Michael, the HOA's vice president. He sounded tired. Alex, we've called an emergency board meeting tonight. For what it's worth, most of us never wanted any of this. Karen's just passionate about rules. I understand, I said. I'm not looking to be a problem. I just want to be able to get in and out of my own house. That evening, the community center was packed. I wheeled in through the main doors and made my way to a spot near the front. Karen sat stiffly at the center of the board table, hands folded over a binder, lips pursed in a thin line. She opened the meeting without so much as glancing in my direction. We're here to discuss the Mitchell situation, she said coldly. Our legal counsel has provided us with options and... Actually, Michael interrupted, clearing his throat, the board has already taken a vote via email under the Emergency Procedures Clause. Karen blinked, visibly thrown. We decided to rescind all fines issued to Mr. Mitchell, approve his temporary ramp, and issue a formal written apology on behalf of the HOA. Karen's face flushed from pink to deep red. You can't make that decision without my approval, she hissed. I'm the president. We can, another board member said firmly, and we have, he continued. We've also voted to settle the legal complaint immediately and use HOA insurance to cover all damages to Mr. Mitchell's property. Karen's lips parted in disbelief. This is outrageous, she muttered, but no one backed her up. For the first time, the rest of the board had stopped following her lead. Karen stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the tile floor. You're letting him destroy our property values over an ugly wooden ramp? She snapped, her voice echoing through the stunned room. A heavy silence followed. No one replied. Michael, ever composed, cleared his throat. There's one more item, he said. In light of recent events and the serious liability Karen has exposed the HOA to, we've also voted for her immediate removal as HOA president under misconduct provision of our bylaws. The color drained from Karen's face. You can't do that, she stammered. I've given 5 years to this community. I've maintained our standards. I protected our property values. The vote was unanimous, Michael said quietly but firmly, and he added, we've been informed that the district attorney is reviewing criminal charges against you for destruction of property and civil rights violations. The DOJ has officially requested all documentation related to your actions. Karen's eyes darted around the room. She looked to her fellow board members, then to the crowd, maybe hoping for support. She found none. With trembling hands, she gathered her papers and binder. This isn't over, she said through clenched teeth, her voice wavering between outrage and disbelief. You have no idea what you've done. She turned sharply toward the exit. But to get there, she had to wheel around me. Our eyes met just for a second, and in that moment I saw it, the realization, the dawning truth that her ironclad rulebook had missed a few important chapters, like compassion and the law, and that oversight, it was going to cost her everything. The next day, Karen was formally served by the district attorney's office. The charges were serious. Destruction of private property, violation of civil rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, abuse of power in a governing position. She was looking at up to a year in jail and fines that could exceed $50,000. When the process server handed her the papers on the porch of her meticulously maintained home, Karen stood frozen. The crisp morning air did nothing to hide the cracks in her carefully curated facade. But I was just following the rules, she whispered, as if saying it out loud might change something. The process server didn't reply. He simply walked away. Karen remained there, motionless, clutching the documents as the truth settled in. Rules don't give you the right to strip others of their dignity, and no clipboard in the world can protect you from the law.